Tropical Cyclone Alfred is expected to make landfall around midday tomorrow. Tens of thousands of properties in Queensland and New South Wales are already without power. I'm Patricia Karvelas, live from the lands of the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing. Let's take you straight to Queensland, where the Premier, David Crisafulli, is providing an update on Tropical Cyclone Alfred in Brisbane.
Are actually assessing the damage at the moment, but there is some real risk to some of those council assets, including some of the stairs and the viewing platforms. Moments ago, staff from council just ushered some people who were on one of those platforms that the underneath of it has been severely eroded. Council is in the process of trying to cordon off that area, and the acting commissioner has only just tasked some resources from police as well. But the message to people surely is that standing on a viewing platform in the middle of an event like this is not something you should be doing. And the fact that resources are having to be diverted there is not a great use of resource, and is certainly not something that's conducive to what we want to be seeing. So the message is clear right now. Being out on the beach is not the best place for people, and we ask everyone to do their bit in making that fact known. I just want to turn to power outages. As of a few moments ago, there's 46,036 properties without power. The bulk of those, around 40,000, are on the Gold Coast, but there's about 1,700 in the Scenic Rim and about 4,800 in the Redlands. Since we last addressed you at 10 a.m, there's been 307 requests for assistance from the SES. A lot of those are for tarp roofs, but there's also been some sandbagging. So there's also been 36 requests in the Southern Downs. So that's preparatory work. We thank the SES for doing what they are doing. 107 on the Gold Coast and 44 in Brisbane, some of the other big numbers. The Queensland Fire Department have responded to 20 incidents today. Police have had 76 calls for assistance. 59 roads impacted on the Gold Coast. To door knocking, there's been 9,000 homes door knocked today. The police minister is actually out with some of those young recruits, going door to door and making people aware of the impending rainfall that's coming. We thank him, but more importantly, we thank the recruits who are yet to graduate from the academy, and they're having their first taste of community service, and we thank them for that. There is now 30 disaster refuges that have been declared from councils. They are all on the website, which is disaster.qld.gov.au. That's disaster.qld.gov.au. It is particularly important that people who have made a plan when it comes to the potential for evacuation, if you are in some of those low-lying areas that might experience either storm surge as part of those council maps or those river floods, river and creek floods. Matt from the Bureau will brief you shortly about some of the impending predictions of the weather system that could lead to those flooding in those parts, and it's important that people do plan to know where those centres are if they're required. Of course, the best place to be is with friends and family, and we continue to articulate that. So the four key challenges, wave, wind, rainfall and flooding, exist, and they exist for different areas at different times. All eyes have been on the Gold Coast today, and indeed in parts of the Redlands, particularly the island communities. But as the system comes across, the likelihood of that rainfall and the potential for flooding will mean that other parts of that system will be in the firing line, and it's important that people do the preparation ahead of that. Rainfall today, since 10 a.m, the bulk of the falls have only been between 40 and 50 mil, which is tremendous. And that's Scenic Rim, Springbrook, Running Creek. So that takes their totals to around about 200 millimetres in a little over 24 hours, with major rainfall still expected. There is a potential for flooding in the rivers and creeks, and I'll ask Matt to touch on that shortly. A couple of other updates. The Redlands Satellite Health Centre has temporarily closed due to potential flood risk, but critical medical equipment has been relocated, as has the staff. So if there are people who require kidney dialysis or chemotherapy, they will still get that treatment. That has been communicated directly to them. The Wynnum Manly Primary Care Clinic has temporarily closed for safety, and that's related to backup power supply. Staff have also been redeployed. All hospitals remain open for emergency care, and we will continue to articulate that. I've said that we have staff there around the clock. Obviously, elective surgery has been cancelled, and we'll continue to not only relay that message to the individual patients through those health and hospital networks, we'll also do that daily to keep people updated, but those hospitals are there for people in their hour of need, and we sincerely thank everyone involved in that. Finally, courts and tribunals in those cyclone warning areas between Gympie and indeed the border, extending west to Ipswich and Gatton. Matters will be adjourned until a future date, although urgent matters are being heard remotely in Townsville, Cairns and Rockhampton, and we thank those people for that assistance. Before I hand over to Matt, I just wanted to say again to everyone involved, and I mean everyone involved, thanks for the efforts in the way that you have handled this event until now, and we're most grateful for the way that Queenslanders are dealing with the impending cyclone. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Premier, and good afternoon all. Tropical Cyclone Alfred remains a Category 2 system and is currently around 125 kilometres east of Brisbane. It continues to move generally west-southwest at around 8 kilometres per hour towards the southeast Queensland coast. The centre of Tropical Cyclone Alfred is still expected to approach the Bay Islands in the early hours of Saturday morning, then move across Moreton Bay during Saturday towards and just north of the Brisbane CBD. Warnings, as I mentioned earlier today, are being updated hourly. So there's tropical cyclone warnings every hour, and you can see the tropical cyclone on the radar imagery on the Bureau's app and on our webpage. The tropical cyclone warning remains in place from Double Island Point right down to the New South Wales-Queensland border, and we also have coastal hazards for large waves, abnormally high tides and coastal erosion in place, as well as a severe weather warning current for intense rainfall and damaging winds extending beyond that tropical cyclone warning area. A little bit about the impacts we're expecting over the coming hours and days. Damaging wind gusts to 120 kilometres per hour are occurring on the coast between Cape Moreton and Cape Byron. These damaging winds are still expected to continue through today and then pick up as the system approaches, and indeed extend from the sort of south coast and islands towards the mainland. Now, Category 2 systems have destructive wind gusts up to 150 kilometres per hour possible, and we are expecting the potential for these winds on the exposed island and southern coastal locations. That's Moreton stretching down through Stradbroke and towards the Gold Coast as the system approaches. So that's around the core of the cyclone and stretching south of the system. That's the critical destructive winds as the system crosses. Now, in terms of the Brisbane area and the Moreton Bay Islands, we are expecting the system to weaken as it comes across Moreton Bay to a Category 1 system. This will mean destructive winds are unlikely in Brisbane itself, but damaging wind gusts to 120 kilometres per hour are expected, particularly on the bayside suburbs around the southern flank of the system. Large swell and powerful waves are still a major concern with this system, and the Premier mentioned the extreme coastal erosion that's taken place. Tropical Cyclone Alfred has produced storm surge values up around 0.7 of a metre, and we are still concerned about the risk of storm tides as we move through the next high tides. The next high tide is around 3 a.m. in the morning and then 3 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. But the risk has reduced, and we aren't expecting those extreme, higher than 1 metre above the normal highest astronomical tides. In fact, we're expecting values up to half a metre around the sort of Gold Coast and increasing to around 0.7 of a metre for the southern Moreton Bay Islands and Redland. Rainfall totals of up to 200 millimetres have already been observed over the past 24 to 36 hours, mainly about the scenic rim and the Gold Coast, as the Premier mentioned. We're expecting these rainfall amounts to increase as the cyclone gets closer and also extend further west and north as the system approaches. We are expecting widespread totals of 300 to 500 millimetres across the duration of this event, and also the possibility of totals up to and exceeding 800 millimetres in some areas, particularly, as I've been saying, around the southern track of the system. And if you look at the radar imagery we're seeing at the moment, you will see the banding of the cyclone wrapping around the south. As that system comes in, that really heavy weather and the winds, etc., that go with it will move towards the coast and affect the Brisbane area. The flooding is a major concern over the coming 24 hours and then right through the weekend and beyond into next week. The heavy to intense rainfall is expected to produce the risk of flash and widespread minor to major riverine flooding. Flood watches remain in place from the Mary River through the creeks and rivers of the Sunshine Coast, the Pine and Caboolture rivers, the Gold Coast rivers and creeks, as well as the upper and lower Brisbane, and the Condamine, McIntyre and Weir rivers are also covered by flood watches. A major flood warning is current for the Logan and Albert rivers, and we are seeing river rises in that system where the rainfall has been concentrated, as I said, over the past 24 to 36 hours. So in summary, Tropical Cyclone Alfred remains a Category 2 system. It is moving slightly erratically, wobbling north and south, but it is continuing its gradual movement towards the southeast Queensland coast. And again, we expect it to cross the Bay Islands in the early hours of Saturday morning and then move through Moreton Bay during Saturday. Wind, rainfall, storm surge and flood risks remain. And those flood risks, as I mentioned, will continue right through the weekend and into next week after the system has moved inland. You can stay up to date with all these warnings and observations in the Bureau radar via the Bureau's app and the Bureau's webpage, and stay alert for updated messaging from emergency services. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I have really quite a brief update about some of the measures that the Commonwealth is taking to support the governments of Premier Crisafulli and also Premier Minns. I've indicated over this week that 2 of the heavy lift helicopters in the National Aerial Fleet are being pre-positioned in the region to provide support if required. The first of those has been in Coffs Harbour for some days. I can confirm that the second is in Bundaberg, which is an important resource that will be available if required. I know that many people, many Queenslanders will be thinking of the people to the south of the border, the people in the northern rivers who've been evacuated from their homes. It's been, I think we have to acknowledge a difficult 24 hours for many of those communities. I've spoken this morning to a number of the political leaders that I know well in that area. I think there's a sense of pride and confidence in the way that those communities are handling those issues, but nonetheless we are thinking of them. It is important that the ADF has been deployed to support the SES in that area, and I can confirm that ADF have arrived in that area. My final update is just in relation to a national coordination mechanism. We've been working closely with both the Queensland and New South Wales governments to work into the food and grocery supply chain. A national meeting again took place today, and I'll leave it to Deputy Premier Bley to provide further details about some of the outcomes of those discussions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I can confirm that we've still had no loss of life and we have no missing persons as a result of this event. We are starting to see more requests for assistance filter through as the wind and rain intensifies down around the Gold Coast area, and we've had those reports of large trees damaging cars and houses and other infrastructure, our power line infrastructure, and we'll expect this to continue as the cyclone continues to track towards the coast. As the Premier said, we have seen severe erosion along the beaches, particularly in that main beach area, and police are now, I've confirmed, are assisting council with road closures and exclusion zones around those impacted areas, including the viewing boardwalks and around the lifeguard towers as a result of that coastal erosion. Since 10 a.m. this morning, the SES has received a further 307 jobs, mostly on the Gold Coast, and this relates to both sandbagging as well as structural related jobs of tarping, leaky roofs, etc., as well as assisting the community in sandbagging at those at-risk flood areas over the next coming days. The Queensland Police Service has received 76 jobs in the past 24 hours, since this morning, and we've seen glass come out of an apartment building on the 34th floor. Fortunately, that building was unoccupied, but also the police are assisting with those 59 affected roads. We've seen a significant amount of power lines down across our roadways, so if people are driving on our roads, please be very careful and treat all trees and power lines down as live power lines. Thank you. The Queensland Fire Department has received an additional 20 jobs since our last media conference, including community assistance, assisting other emergency services, but fortunately to date no swiftwater rescues at this stage. An emergency alert has just been issued for the Redlands local government area for North Stradbroke and the Lower Bay Islands to take shelter due to the impacts of Tropical Cyclone Alfred's expected this afternoon and overnight impacting that area. And this is something we can expect to see, whether it be today or over the coming days, with respect as the cyclone approaches the coast or as we move into those flooding events. We'll keep our community informed and give them as much information as we can. As the Premier said, there's just been more than 46,036 in fact power outages, mainly across the Gold Coast, Scenic Rim and Redlands area. Some suburbs in the Gold Coast and Gold Coast hinterlands area have now lost telecommunications coverage, and that's as a result of 26 of the mobile base stations losing power and running out of battery life. Those suburbs include Belinga North, Binnaburra, Burleigh Waters, Coolangatta, O'Reilly's, Parkwood, Bundall, Reedy Creek, Mudgeeraba, Currumbin and Springbrook. And NBN outages, which affect the landlines, are also occurring in those same areas. And the moment it's safe to do so, our telcos that we've been engaged with will get into those areas and try and get generation to those base stations. While we haven't had reports of inundation at this time, I can confirm that in some of the canal areas, the backyards, particularly around the Broadbeach waters area, we are seeing some water starting to lap onto those backyards, but we've had no inundation, and it's what we sort of see on the Gold Coast when we do see some heavy rain and as the tide approaches this afternoon. Door knocking continues today, as the Premier's indicated. We've now door knocked more than 9,000 homes. Now that'll continue in the Brisbane and surrounds area. The door knocking isn't continuing on the Gold Coast today. Our crews are into emergency response today. But around the Brisbane and surrounds, we'll continue that door knocking, mainly for those residents that will now be at risk of those riverine flooding and flash flooding over the next coming days. I can confirm that, please, there's still time to make a plan in those areas, particularly around that flood risk, is to make the plan now. Understand that if you are going to leave your premises, think about when you will leave, where you will go, and family and friends, while we have our evacuation centres and they will continue open for flood risk, but family and friends is the best place to be. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Acting Commissioner. Good afternoon. And for those tuning in, I'm Jared Blade, the Deputy Premier of Queensland. I just want to give an update in relation to supermarkets because, as you'd appreciate, it's been a lot of patience tested over the last few days and a lot of discussions had both at a state level and the national level. I want to firstly, though, thank all the workers in retail and those that work in the supermarkets across Queensland. I want to particularly thank the ones that have gone home for their own safety but have come back to work to stock the shelves or to stand behind the counter and serve Queenslanders to allow supermarkets to stay open a little bit longer. As has been described every day from the Bureau of Meteorology, where the tropical cyclone has slowed and not crossed as originally indicated or when we thought, because of the unpredictable nature of tropical cyclones. We had early on shopping centres which were going to close, and we worked through the national agency. NEMA have been chairing meetings. I want to thank Jenny McAllister, the Minister, and I speak on a daily basis about how to try and coordinate it both from a New South Wales perspective, a Queensland perspective, but through NEMA, which is the National Emergency Management Agency, who chairs the meeting. As described by the Minister, it met today, it's meeting tomorrow, and it met yesterday. And that's about making sure all of the retailers, both the small retailers, the large retailers, the New South Wales government, the Queensland government and the Commonwealth government, and all the freighters, all the logistic companies work together to ensure we get groceries back onto supermarket shelves. So early on, a few days ago, we had supermarkets, based on the warnings, were going to shut early and close their supermarkets. But with a lot of work and effort, they managed to get staff back to get behind the counter and actually keep these supermarkets open. So it has been a store-by-store basis. There are some supermarkets located in large shopping centres that the supermarkets don't have a choice, where the shopping centre says they've closed for safety reasons, and the supermarkets haven't had a choice but to close. There are other situations where you're also dealing, we're all humans, we're dealing with staff that are wandering their own homes, particularly the more south you go in the Gold Coast and northern New South Wales area, that are worrying about their own homes and flood inundation and their families. So I really want to pay tribute to the grocery workers, the supermarket workers and the retail workers who have kept stores open for as long as they possibly can. However, I would say to Queenslanders that you will expect over the next 24 hours for supermarkets to progressively be closing from this afternoon. As we have been told by the Bureau of Meteorology, Tropical Cyclone Alfred is likely to hit shore or the land midday tomorrow, and then it's important for the workers of the supermarkets to be where they need to be, as safe as possible. It's also clear that distribution centres, as of this afternoon, have started to close down. Farms are not producing at the moment because I think we're going to be in a 24-hour period where product is going to be less, and supermarkets will be closed, particularly over the next 24 hours. So for Queenslanders, you will progressively see this afternoon supermarkets closing, including your local grocer and supermarkets. But as I said at the start, I want to do a shout out to all the workers that have come back to work to keep supermarkets open for as long as possible in the preparation for the Tropical Cyclone Alfred hitting the shores. We will keep assessing this on a daily basis, and I can assure you, from the Commonwealth Government's perspective, the New South Wales and the Queensland Government's perspective, we'll do what we can to ensure the roads are open and the trucks can get through and the stocks reshelved as soon as possible. We'll keep updating everyone on a daily basis. The last piece of advice I can give Queenslanders is, if you go onto your local supermarket's website, all the stores will be listed. The times are going to be closing from this afternoon, but that was a decision made at the national meeting today that progressively stores will shut down this afternoon. And I think, as Queenslanders would expect, as we don't know what's going to happen with Tropical Cyclone Alfred over the next 24 hours, you'd expect all our workers to be safe, and that is at their home or their family. So thank you, everybody. We'll keep giving everyone updates when NEMA chairs the meeting tomorrow, the National Coordination Authority, for all the supermarket chains and logistics, but our priority is to ensure we get the stocks back on the shelves when the supermarkets start reopening. And importantly and finally, the message is, once supermarkets do reopen, I think patience is going to be required. I'd plead with people for a bit of patience. As you'd appreciate, farms will be impacted. Freight logistics to fill the supermarkets, the shelves will be challenging, particularly if staff have properties that are impacted. So I think all Queenslanders will understand and appreciate natural disasters, and a little bit of patience and care for our retail hospitality workers in the next few days. Thank you. Premier.
Thank you, Deputy Premier, and thank you, Minister, for the way that you've worked together. Over to you.
Premier, for those residents in potentially flood-affected areas, what should they be doing tonight and into the earliest hours of the morning? Should they be trying to stay awake to assess damage and whatnot? What's the best course of action?
They need to have a plan, and they need to watch the forecast. And part of the reason why the Bureau has gone to hourly updates is to enable that information to flow. Now, when it comes to river and creek flooding, the majority of people know if they are in one of those areas. If you don't, go on to the website disaster.qld.gov.au and have a look at those council flood maps, those overlays. That's important. have a plan, have an evacuation plan if you're in one of those areas. If in doubt, go and stay with friends and family. That's your life is worth more than anything else.
Premier, when is it too late to go to an evacuation centre?
Well, McKenna, the evacuation centres are a last resort, and we have to continue to say that. We thank councils for standing them up, and there's 30 of them that have been nominated. But they are a last resort, but they're there for people if there's no other choice to go there. We recommend, if it's possible, to go and stay with someone else, with friends or family, but it's, of course, we have to have a place for people to be able to take refuge if they need to. And likewise, if they are impacted, it's just a source, a single point of truth that they can go to. We're asking people to have a plan. That's the greatest thing you can have in this. So in the same way that we were speaking to people in the last couple of days as the earlier phase of preparing for the wind and the waves, we were saying to people, make sure you clean your yard, but also have that box with all of the key items. It's the same. It's the same with this. Just know where you are, have a plan, and you will get through it.
Premier, have you been briefed on whether Brisbane could face power outages for several days, similar to down south?
Well, I think Peter from Energex answered that this morning, in that it's always the way that if power is cut, getting it back on is the most important thing for everyone's sake in terms of the recovery. Now, how long that takes, that depends as to what the damage is. Is it just line damage? Is it damage to key transformers? All of those things impact on how long it takes to get back up. But I make this promise to Queenslanders, and that is restoring electricity is front and centre of any recovery. And we have taken the response to this seriously. We will take the recovery even more seriously. And, at the moment, we said there's 46,000 people without power. It's a terrible experience to have that over a longer period of time. What we can do is make sure that we are ready to respond. And to reiterate what we've been saying and why I'm very confident that you will see connections in record time, there are 1,200 Energex staff who have been working and serving their community, but more importantly, are now ready and waiting to respond to whatever the damage looks like after the event. And there's 800 Ergon staff who will come in and give them a spell when they're tired to keep the show on the road. So those preparations are in place, and I've got every confidence that they will move heaven and earth to make it work.
Premier, for those areas without power, without telecommunications, how are you going to disseminate information to them? So you can't door knock all those people.
Alex, they will, and that's something that the acting commissioner has said. They will go door to door. That is important. Where those telecommunication towers go out, if there's key information that needs to get to them, door knocking will take place. Now, we hope that they've been availing themselves of the information before those towers go down, but if they need key information, they'll get it.
Just a quick one for the Deputy Premier.
Last one.
Yes.
Deputy, are you happy with what the Games Venues Review team has recommended?
Are there any more questions on the impending cyclone that's about to hit land, or are we going to Olympic and Paralympic Games?
One for the Minister.
Let's do that, and then we'll come to other issues, shall we?
And then we do have to go, guys, too. Sorry.
Minister, we're hearing reports casual staff have been stood down for several days now. I imagine they will be for more days. Is there any talk of financial assistance for those people to get through this disaster?
Look, the Commonwealth does have mechanisms to provide support of this kind, and we're dependent on advice about impacts. We're constantly assessing the impacts that are occurring in communities. Obviously, our focus right now is on public safety. We are in the response phase of an emergency, and all of our thoughts are with making sure that emergency services personnel have what they need to keep community safe. However, as you've heard this afternoon, we are also thinking about the recovery, and we will certainly be thinking through those issues in the coming days.
Nothing else on this?
All right. What was your question?
Yes. So, are you happy with what the Games Venues Review team has recommended to you?
Well, I'm not sure because I don't get...
And that was an emergency update from the Queensland Premier and the Bureau of Meteorology on the progress of Tropical Cyclone Alfred. let's pick up on some of the more important points that were made there. The BOM says Tropical Cyclone Alfred remains a Category 2 system. It is moving slightly erratically. They've confirmed it's wobbling north and south, but it is continuing its gradual movement towards the southeast Queensland coast. Queenslanders should expect supermarkets to progressively close over the next 24 hours. The centre of Tropical Cyclone Alfred is still expected to approach the Bay Islands in the early hours of Saturday morning, then move across Moreton Bay during Saturday towards just the north of the Brisbane CBD. The system is expected to weaken to Category 1 as it crosses Moreton Bay. Destructive winds are unlikely in Brisbane itself, but damaging wind gusts of 120 kilometres an hour are expected in the Bayside suburbs around the southern flank of the system. They also stressed in that briefing that flooding is a major concern off the back of heavy rainfall. Just some other things to share with you. 46,000 properties are without power. The bulk of them are on the Gold Coast, we've learnt, and there have been 307 requests for SES assistance. We'll bring you more as it comes to hand. Now, we have some breaking news on what Tropical Cyclone Alfred will mean for the date of the federal election and the possibility of the government handing down a budget. For more on this, let's bring in National Affairs correspondent Jane Norman. Jane, welcome. What's the latest?
Well, Patricia, I've spoken to multiple sources late this afternoon, and we can confirm that Cyclone Alfred has all but washed away the Prime Minister's plans to call an election this weekend for April 12. We've known for some time that that was the Prime Minister's preferred date. It would have meant that he could avoid handing down a budget and also avoid the complexities of campaigning during that late April period where we have Easter, Anzac Day and school holidays. However, because of the cyclone and the possibility of the destruction it'll bring, and also just the disruption it'll bring to huge parts of Queensland and New South Wales, it is now looking increasingly likely, and in fact plans are really underway for a budget to be handed down as scheduled on March 25, with an election to be held in May.
Now, Jane, this is significant because we have known for some time that the government didn't want to deliver this budget. That's been widely known, I think, in Canberra circles, although to be fair, the Treasurer has consistently said he's working towards that budget, but it is kind of a significant derailment to the original Labor plan, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is, and it just shows, Patricia, that external events are increasingly sort of disrupting or dominating what will be this election campaign, whether it is this cyclone that nobody really predicted this late into the year, whether it's Donald Trump, China or Ukraine. This election really is likely to be defined by these kind of external events. But as you said, Jim Chalmers and Katie Gallagher, the Finance Minister, the Treasurer, have consistently said that they were working towards a budget on May 25 as scheduled. However, simultaneously, they've also been preparing for an economic statement or a mini budget, and that was specifically for an April 12 election. So if the Prime Minister called the election as expected this Sunday, in the wake of an expected Labor win in the WA state election, then he would have been campaigning for 5 weeks, missed the budget and gone to the polls on April 12. Soon after he called the election, the government was planning on releasing this economic statement outlining the key numbers, its policies, and that is before the Treasury statement, which comes out about a week after an election's called, which is sort of the budget statement of truth outlining, what the numbers are in the, sort of the economic numbers are. So we know that those two were happening simultaneously, and so all the work that's gone into that economic statement will now just go into preparing for the budget proper on March 25. But as you say, this is not what people expected. We did not expect for the House of Representatives to come back that week and for Labor to hand down a budget, despite what Mr Chalmers and Senator Gallagher have been saying.
Well, it is quite a significant change to the original plan, but as we know, Jane, natural disasters don't really care much for politics or anything really. Thank you so much. Well, the Prime Minister stood up in the National Situation Room in Canberra again this morning. which is where he's been observing Tropical Cyclone Alfred as it gets closer to making landfall. The federal government is sending 120 Defence Force personnel to New South Wales to door-knock at-risk people and help the state's emergency services. He praised the resilience of Australians in the face of the impending weather event.
When nature does its worst, Australians are at our best. We rally, we lift each other up, we look out for our neighbours, we look out for our local community. Communities come together at a time like this. And to the local MPs and mayors I've spoken to, that is what we are seeing here. We get each other through the dark times hour by hour and day by day.
Liberal MP Angie Bell is the member for Moncrieff on the Gold Coast, and she's currently bunkered down in her home, sandbagged and all, under order not to leave. She joins us now. Angie Bell, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Patricia.
Not the best circumstances. Describe your situation right now.
Well, I'm in my kitchen. My furniture is all around me off the floor in case we get a storm surge over the rock wall. I'm not that far from the beach. Here in Miami with my community, I'd like to just send my thoughts and also the thoughts of my colleagues here on the Gold Coast who I've been in regular contact with to Gold Coasters. We're all in this together and we'll all come out on the other side and help each other as we do with a fantastic community here on the Gold Coast. The spirit's alive and well.
No, it certainly is. 46,000 properties are without power, and we've learnt that the bulk of them are on the Gold Coast. Do you still have power? Have you lost power? Can you just give me a sense of that?
Sure. I do have power, otherwise I wouldn't be talking to you.
Well, you could
PK.
still be on battery.
Well, I've got the lights and I've obviously got the Wi-Fi still to my amazement, but my neighbours across the road don't have their power on, and I know Nobby's Beach is out of power at the moment. So it's a difficult situation for those Gold Coasters. There's about 33,000 was the last number I heard Premier Christofouli talk about this afternoon in terms of those customers here on the Gold Coast, Energex customers who are out of power. But I've turned the solar system off, I've turned the gas off, and I've made sure that I've got everything I need here for the next few days because Alfred is hovering off the coast and he's taking his time and he's taking our beaches.
Yeah, he is taking your beaches, or the Alfred is kind of been very menacing in some ways. Remains a Category 2, we've just found out, but it's unpredictable, it's erratic, it's been slow. I know you've been talking to lots of your constituents and also reflecting your own feelings, Angie Bell. That long period you've had to wait and you're still waiting. What's that been like to kind of manage such a long period waiting for this cyclone to hit?
Well, I think a big part of it, PK, has been the preparations made by the City of Gold Coast, which have been fantastic for residents. We've had a bit of extra time. We've also heard clearly and regularly from the State Premier on what those preparations have been. Our community's got stuck in. I've been out with my Moncrieff Community Cabinet and making sure that charities are ready to help and coordinated after this event so that we can help with water, with food, with transport as soon as possible. And so we've been sandbagging our neighbours. My neighbours have been sandbagging my house while I've been off helping others. And so we have a terrific Gold Coast community here who always rally together, but no more so than now when we need it the most.
Of course, this is a really big danger zone, the next 24 hours, but no doubt there is a bit of apprehension in the community about the broader implications. This will have a huge economic cost. This will affect people, I imagine, quite deeply. Have you been talking to people about the sort of shorter term and then longer term impact of this?
Well, we've seen terrible beach scarping all the way from Main Beach, where towels have gone into the sand, all the way through Surfers Paradise, where parts of the Esplanade have gone into the ocean. We have a rock wall all the way along Hedges Avenue, and those my neighbours there have been sending me text messages of pictures of what their front yards look like. I'm a bit further away, but not that far away. And so we've seen damage all the way along the coastline, beyond the border into New South Wales. And so there will be a big clean-up. It will take a long time, but we stick together here on the Gold Coast and we'll be helping our neighbours. We'll be mucking in. I'll be here, of course, hopefully, after all of this is passed, but we just wait and see what's going to happen. We've prepared for the worst, but of course, we hope for the very best for Gold Coasters and South East Queenslanders more broadly. Can I send my thoughts up to Brisbane as well?
Yeah, and obviously the next period is the really kind of difficult period, although it's all been difficult all week, but, you know, waiting for this cyclone to hit. Are you happy with the sort of level of government's management of the situation so far? Has there been enough notice of all of the things that you need to know before such an event?
Well, look, I've had regular messages from the City of Gold Coast. I've had regular messages from the Bureau of Meteorology as an MP also around what's coming and where we're up to. I still have internet so I can read through the warnings but also follow that advice. Haven't heard any warnings from the federal government, which was promised, of course, in 2024. I don't want to make this political, but it is important that we do have the messages that come through, those emergency messages, and that particular one was promised by the government on safety and it hasn't come to fruition, which is a bit disappointing. So I'm glad that I've signed up to the council warnings, and I'm very happy that I've been getting so many messages from the Premier and the City of Gold Coast.
Just finally, we've just confirmed here at the ABC and broadcast that the Prime Minister will not call an election over the weekend, and that means there will be a budget delivered. So, Angie Bell, I'm telling you that you're going to be on your way to Canberra for Budget Week. Is that the right decision?
Well, there'll be a bit for me to do between now and then, and certainly for my constituency and for the Gold Coast. We'll have to start work on cleaning up depending on how we fare as the cyclone bears down on us. But certainly I think the Prime Minister should be focused on governing, not on campaigning at this time. This is affecting 4 million Queenslanders, and so I think we should be going back to Canberra. Government should be delivering a budget, certainly if it has nothing to hide. He should be doing that, the Prime Minister, and we should be helping Australians with bulk billing, getting that Medicare legislation across the line to help with that. Those promises should be done. We should be saving jobs in Tasmania with the salmon farming down there as well, and get on with the budget. And I think Australians want to see that, and then they want their opportunity to say who they want to be in government after the next election, because they're sick and tired of this cost of living crisis. And now on top of that, Gold Coasters have a natural disaster as well, and those up in North Queensland have also suffered over the last few months. Can I also mention those in northern New South Wales in Lismore who are now facing flooding as well again. So I think Australians need help at this time, and the Prime Minister should really be focused solely on that.
Well, it looks like that's going to be the case. Angie Bell, thanks for joining us, and of course, take care.
See you on the other side.
Well, as Tropical Cyclone Alfred edges slowly towards the coast, it's now firmly within the Bureau of Meteorology's radar, meaning they've been giving hourly updates throughout the day. Let's bring in Jonathan Howe from the Bureau now to hear what they're saying this hour. Jonathan, thank you for your time. What can we expect once the cyclone does make landfall? How long will the rain and the damaging wind last?
Good afternoon, Patricia. So at this stage, we are expecting Tropical Cyclone Alfred to cross the coast on Saturday morning, but really importantly, we are emphasising not to pay too much attention to the exact timing. That's because we will see these severe impacts well before that actual crossing. So what we can expect heading into tonight is that rain and wind will really build across that tropical cyclone warning zone. First across northern New South Wales, and then for the Gold Coast and Brisbane, we'll start to see that rain picking up into the early hours of the morning. Of course, we have seen people in Brisbane commenting on the sunshine. Tropical Cyclone Alfred is coming towards the coast, and as we head into Saturday morning towards that crossing, we will see very heavy rainfall, destructive winds around the southern flank of the cyclone itself, as well as a very dangerous storm tide coming through, causing more erosion. And at the crossing time itself, we are expecting to see those very significant impacts continuing, and then well after that as well.
Jonathan, we keep hearing that it's unpredictable, it's erratic, it's been slow. I think for some people that's been confusing. What are you most worried about, that those words will perhaps mean that people think that once it hits it's going to be fine because it's slow? Is that Is that an interpretation that you fear?
I think Tropical Cyclone Alfred has really been quite a long duration event. People have been waiting this for quite some time. Tropical Cyclone Alfred has been around the Coral Sea for more than 2 weeks now, so it has sort of been in our minds for quite a long period of time. And now this anticipation as it slowly moves towards the coast. There are a few words being thrown around. One of them is particularly around the weakening. That's really not the case in this scenario. So we are reminding people not to get too caught up in the final category at crossing. It could cross as a category 1 or 2, but categories only relate to the wind speed at the time. Regardless of the category, it will be very destructive in terms of heavy rainfall and moderate to major flooding, even life-threatening flash flooding as well. So there are a lot of warnings which have gone out, and there are many more warnings which are yet to come out, especially as you start to see that rain and wind really build. And then even following landfall, we are expecting flooding to continue for quite some period of time. So we are reminding Queenslanders to keep up with those latest updates from the Bureau and keep following all information and advice from local authorities.
What will it feel like on the ground in Brisbane compared to, for instance, northern New South Wales?
Yeah, so tonight we'll see that heavy rainfall building for northern New South Wales first. We've already seen more than 100 millimetres across parts of the northern rivers at Yukai and down towards Lismore Casino. Those totals are really building right now. And then across the Gold Coast and Brisbane, you'll start to see that rainfall building in the early hours of Saturday morning. So a lot of those very strong winds coming through. So it's just about that timing of when we start to see those worst of the impacts. And then by Saturday morning, everywhere south of the landfall point, which at this point is around Redcliffe to the north of Brisbane, we'll see the worst of those impacts. So heavy rainfall, damaging to destructive winds and dangerous storm surge.
And is the cyclone narrowing as it closes in on the mainland?
So at the moment, Tropical Cyclone Alfred is quite a broad system. It is having impacts all the way down towards Coffs Harbour. Even Sydney is seeing hazardous surf conditions, so quite a broad reach. As it starts to move towards the coast, tropical cyclones, as they do, start to interact with more shallow water and also the topography. So that can sort of bend and change the sort of symmetry of the system itself, but still very, very dangerous. It is a very broad system, and even after crossing, it will continue to bring those very strong winds down from the Coral Sea. So as I mentioned, very heavy rainfall continuing all the way through the weekend and even stretching into inland parts of Queensland, so the Darling Downs and down into the northern tablelands of New South Wales. So it has a very broad reach. It is quite a large system.
We've had some figures thrown around about the sheer volume of rain, which I think for some viewers could be hard to visualise. Can you just give us kind of a metaphor for just how much water this is?
Yeah, so if you don't live in the tropics or subtropics, talking these sorts of rainfall figures, so we are expecting to see, for example, that intense rainfall, 6-hourly figures of up to 250 millimetres and rainfall event totals of up to 800 millimetres, even higher totals than that. To put that into perspective, for people in Victoria, for example, that's all of Melbourne's rainfall for the entire year over the space of about 24 hours or less. So a lot of rainfall coming through. Of course, this part of Australia is quite accustomed to seeing those big rainfall totals, but we will see, of course, that flooding coming through. The sheer amounts of rainfall will basically all accumulate and go into those rivers and creeks and cause quite dangerous flooding. So it can be quite difficult to comprehend if you're not from a more tropical part of Australia. But of course, northern Queenslanders and people across the top end are pretty used to these numbers, but they are huge figures.
Yeah, they are. They're certainly experts, that's for sure, and very used to trying to deal with these difficult situations. Just finally, how long are the floods predicted to last? I think I may have lost you, Jonathan. I think Jonathan's having trouble hearing us. Jonathan, thank you for joining us this afternoon and giving us this update. And here are our top stories. Conditions are deteriorating in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales as Tropical Cyclone Alfred closes in on the coast. Gusting winds have left more than 80,000 homes and businesses without power. The damaging core of the cyclone is forecast to reach the mainland late tomorrow morning. Already, damaging winds and heavy rain are being felt within the cyclone warning zone, which stretches from Double Island Point in Queensland to just north of Grafton in New South Wales. Evacuation orders are in place in the northern rivers, while more than 100 defence personnel have been sent to the affected areas. West Australian voters go to the polls tomorrow. The opposition is hoping to make some gains, while the Labor government is seeking a third term after a landslide victory in the last election. ABC Chief Elections Analyst Anthony Green says Labor is expected to win a comfortable majority of seats. Well, as we mentioned there, really much of the news has been about the cyclone, as it should be, but there is an election in Australia tomorrow, the West Australian election. That means that West Australians go to the polls on Saturday with Premier Roger Cook trying to maintain his massive majority in Parliament. Now, the Liberals and Nationals are hoping to make some serious gains, but they face an uphill battle to win government. ABC elections analyst Casey Briggs sets the scene for us.
When Labor came to power in Western Australia 8 years ago, it won a landslide victory. 4 years later, in 2021, amidst the pandemic and then Premier Mark McGowan's massive popularity, Labor won a landslide upon a landslide. Over the course of 2 elections, more than a quarter of Western Australian voters flipped from the Conservative side of politics to Labor. And that's why, going into this weekend's election, this is what the Parliament looks like. Don't adjust your sets. The Liberals really do have just 2 seats in the lower house at the moment. The Nationals have 3, and they are the official opposition party. The Labor Party, they have 54 seats in the Parliament, a thumping majority. For the opposition parties to form a government after this weekend's election, they would need a frankly massive swing toward them on a uniform basis. 23.3% is roughly what would be required. It's really hard to find anyone who seriously thinks that's likely. And so that's why one of the other questions we'll be watching for this weekend is, well, can the Liberal Party, can the Nationals make some gains, reverse their landslide defeat of 4 years ago and become a little bit more electorally competitive? If they want to do that, they're going to have to make some inroads in the city of Perth, which is a sea of red at the moment. The Liberal Party holds just 1 seat in the capital, the seat of Cottesloe along the coast. Then, well, there's the Basel factor. The Liberals have enlisted some star power in the marginal seat of Churchlands. They're running the Lord Mayor of Perth and radio and TV personality Basil Zemplis. And if he wins, he would immediately become the highest profile Liberal MP in the state. He's widely regarded as a future leader of the party. Roger Cook is the firm favourite to be the Premier come Sunday morning in Western Australia, but this is still his first big test at the polls in a state election as leader. And there's plenty at stake.
And if you're keen to hear more about the West Australian election, you can listen to an episode of my podcast, Politics Now, where I speak exclusively to David Talbot. He's a pollster and strategist with Talbot Mills about the key themes driving voters at this election and what the takeaways are there for Anthony Albanese ahead of the impending federal election. We hear a lot about Western Australia being different to the rest of the country in terms of voter sentiment. So what are some of the key themes in WA versus the rest of the country? And what are focus groups all about? You can find out if you go to the ABC Listen app and check it out. Well, opposition leader Peter Dutton is still yet to respond after it emerged he attended a private political fundraising event in Sydney as his Brisbane electorate was preparing for Tropical Cyclone Alfred. Deputy Liberal leader Susan Lee was out this morning attempting to put the focus back on the government, saying Labor has been advertising for a budget fundraiser which would not go ahead if an election was called. Ms Lee also defended Mr Dutton's travels, saying no one can doubt Peter Dutton's commitment to his electorate.
I note that Anthony Albanese has recently left to come back to Canberra. He was also in Sydney on that day. No one can doubt Peter Dutton's commitment to his electorate. I was actually in a virtual meeting with him yesterday, which he took from his community.
The Prime Minister, for his part, says Peter Dutton's movements are a matter for him.
Well, that's a matter for him. I did see his comments about my responsibilities, but that's a matter for him. He can comment on his own responsibilities. I am fulfilling mine.
This story about Peter Dutton's whereabouts has certainly been one of many in the political sphere over the last couple of days. We're yet to hear directly from Peter Dutton about that issue, although clearly several of his frontbenchers have been asked in the last couple of days. On afternoon briefing this afternoon, Jane Norman joined us to confirm that she has established that the budget is back on. Now, what does that mean and why does it matter? Well, there were high expectations that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese would call an election either Sunday or Monday for an April 12th election. That was very much on the cards. And then, of course, Cyclone Alfred interrupted. Now, that cyclone has meant that the Labor Party's plans have basically been thrown out, and the Prime Minister has been focused, as he has made clear in his press conferences, on the cyclone, which means there has not been a decision to go to an election. This was the last possible time, Monday, for the Prime Minister to be able to call an election under the rules, which mean there have to be a certain number of days allowed for campaigning, which could happen without a budget. So that means that politicians will be going back to Canberra for a March budget, where the government will deliver a budget, and that budget will unveil its policies and perhaps also, of course, details of the economic outlook, the potential budget deficit. We have seen that issue be a huge one, of course, as well. Labor has delivered 2 surpluses that they talk about, but they're obviously on the horizon is debt that also has to be unveiled in that budget. So that looks to be back on the agenda now, which means Parliament will return, and all politicians, as we talk to Angie Bell, a Liberal MP for Moncrieff, will all be going back to the Parliament. A budget will be delivered, and then a couple of days after the government delivers a budget, there will also be the opposition leader's reply. I expect that the opposition leader also didn't expect that he'd have to be delivering a reply. I think most political onlookers and those people involved in politics expected that this budget wouldn't happen. But of course, everything has since changed, and the nation has been rightly focused on Cyclone Alfred, which has had a very long pathway to potentially hitting the coast, and we're waiting still for that. Just a couple of updates on that cyclone that I want to share with you. We know some details because the Queensland Premier joined us a little early, of course, reporters, and we broadcast that press conference a little earlier. 46,000 properties are without power. The bulk of them are actually on the Gold Coast, and so that's pretty much an acute area where there have been many issues emerge with all of the disruption from this cyclone. The weather pattern is very much lashing people in a large area. So the cyclone may not have crossed, and we expect that on Saturday morning going right into Saturday, but we do know that there has been a consequence already. Many people dealing with very high winds and a lot of rain, which is clearly causing a lot of disruption. There are 307 requests for SES assistance as well. We know that this cyclone remains at Category 2. It's been described as wobbling north and south. It's been unpredictable. It's been erratic. And therefore, there have been constant updates, hourly updates now from the Bureau of Meteorology, giving us updates on its path and what it's expected to do, and we've been bringing you those updates. Now, here on ABC News, we'll bring you more of those updates throughout the evening and in the next 24 hours, where you can expect the latest news to reliably be delivered to you about this cyclone and the affected communities. That's afternoon briefing for today. I'm Patricia Karvelas. Stay with us here on the ABC News channel. Joe O'Brien is up next with today's top stories and the latest, of course, with Tropical Cyclone Alfred. Have a terrific afternoon.